Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem called Offerings, which is poem number 28 of the 29 of By the Roadside. So clearly we are now at the end of By the Roadside. And I want to point out with this poem, again, there are readers of Leaves of Grass that love to bypass these kinds of small poems. And in fact, I've been asked a number of times here recently, by virtue of the fact that we are spending so much time, an individual lecture over every one of these poems, including a poem like Offerings. Are you serious with me? To which I will say, yeah. And in fact, I'm going to make the argument that I think Whitman very intentional in the compilation and the reformulation and the redacting process. When he was putting together Leaves of Grass, I think he knew exactly what he was doing, and using this set of lines, Offerings, as a way to kind of tie together so much of what he's trying to do in Leaves of Grass, right from the very beginning, when the very first word of the poems, all of Leaves of Grass, first word was the word come. It's an invitation. And with it being an invitation, I think we're going to read this poem Offerings in I think in a different way. I hope that's our case. I want us to come to these texts and to say, this is an interesting poem to find its way into this place in Leaves of Grass. The unity of Leaves of Grass is one of the things I'm trying to emphasize here. Now, our assumptions I think are self-evident. I'm hopeful that you have been reading with us and studying with us at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt is what we're calling this. And I hope, we used that word correspondence in the previous poem. I hope there is beginning to be a correspondence. A number of you are reporting that's exactly what's happening. You're beginning to hear all these echoes in the correspondences that happen. We've worked from, I mentioned the very first word come, we've worked all the way through inscriptions. We've done a set of introductory comments on By the Roadside, and as well, we just finished, of course, with locations and times. Just watch this. Do you remember these? Of course you remember these lines, right? Because they're some of the most precious in all of Leaves of Grass. A child said, passage 6, obviously, a song of myself. A child said, "What is this? What is the grass? Fetching it to me with full hands." How could I answer the child, I do not know what it is any more than he? I want to concentrate on the word fetching. And the way in which that word, we didn't say much about it when we were exegeting before, but I had this sense, so I'd come back to it with this set of lines. Offerings. I want us to think about the way in which that word picture of the kid picking up some grass, could have been hay, right? Could have been some grass and flowers, or whatever, and coming up to Whitman and saying, "Dude, what is this?" And of course, in that moment, Whitman is going to play the game of, any number of great poets. We think of Byron talking about the world in a grain of sand. I mean, in that moment, there's an interesting kind of offering. Of course, as the child is fetching the grass, that's a form of an offering. And as the speaker, the adult speaker, Whitman, we'll just call him Walt, responds, "Dude, I don't know any better. What do you think that it is?" That correspondence was the previous word. That symbiosis that happens in great art. And I think Leaves of Grass is, can I say, one of the greatest exemplars of the way in which offerings can happen. To give is to receive, and we've seen so much of that already. And then just to kind of finish this side of the conversation, how about this one? Song of we're in passage 6, obviously. Song of the Open Road. Passage 6. Do you remember this? We've already talked about it, but do you remember this? "Now if 1,000 perfect men were to appear, it would not amaze me. Now if 1,000 beautiful forms of women appeared, it would not astonish me. Now I see the secret of the making of the best persons. It is to grow in the open air and to eat and sleep with the earth. Here a great personal deed has room. Such a deed seizes upon the hearts of the whole race of men. Its effusion of strength and will overwhelms law and mocks all authority and all argument against it. Here is the test of wisdom." Wisdom is not finally tested in schools. Wisdom cannot be passed from one having it to another not having it. Wisdom is of the soul. It's not susceptible of proof, is its own proof. Applies to all stages and objects and qualities, and is content, is the certainty of the reality and immortality of things and the excellence of things. Something there is in the flow to the side of things that provokes it out of the soul. Now, I re-examine philosophies and religions. They may prove well in lecture halls, yet not prove it all under the spacious clouds and along the landscape and flowing currents. As I said when I lectured on this, I don't think there's very many passages that are more profound than that set. And yet notice how it begins with this line. Now if 1,000 perfect men were to appear. And now let's go to the poem Offerings. 1,000 perfect men and women appear. Around each gathers a cluster of friends and gay children and youths with offerings. Now again, we got to be careful here that we don't overlook a poem like this. For example, come on, give me one good reason why. Well, offerings, the word, only gets used one time in all Leaves of Grass. It's right here. Again, I want to point out the way in which I think that Whitman was more than just one or two or three or four great poems. Yes, of course, we'll have to admit that Lilacs is one of the greatest poems in the English language. We'll get to it here in just a few lines, okay? But I want to point out that there's a lot of things happening in Leaves of Grass, and now we're at one of those moments where for the only time in all Leaves of Grass the word offerings gets used. And what is this little offering? Notice he begins again with the word number 1,000. We've seen this where he will talk about large numbers to try to gain a sense of the magnitude. Notice the word perfect, and we talked about that. We did Song of the Open Road 6. Perfect, as in lacking nothing. That's his idea of perfect. It's not that we don't mean perfection as in every way. We just mean, I know I have the best of time and space and was never measured and never will be measured. That idea from Song of Myself, passage 46. Notice it's men and women. 1,000 perfect men and women appear. Now this idea of appearing is back to seeing, and now we're back to roadside. So you can kind of see the connection with all these poems to that. It's an observation. In other words, all of a sudden I see this happening. I see this appearance happening. And of course, we have this kind of appearance happening in Shakespeare periodically. We think of Hamlet's father's ghost. We think about the ghosts of the sons of Banquo, for example, in the play Macbeth, in the fourth act there, where all those ghosts come up in 4-1 on all of that to impress negatively upon Macbeth that he obviously screwed up. Around each, that is to say, each of these different perfect men and women, gathers a cluster. Now, the word cluster is an interesting word because in a collection of poems called Leaves of Grass, and notice a child fetching grass, that is to say, kind of bonding together. And again, it is the tragic irony of Leaves of Grass that Whitman genuinely believed when he published in 1855, that brief set of lines, that he maybe could keep the nation together. He really believed that a poet could have that kind of power. And of course, as we're about to discover when we pick up Drum Taps and Break Our Heart, that obviously no set of lines could keep the nation from tearing itself apart. But here, notice, he's celebrating the idea that we have this tendency to cluster, to come together. Friends, gay children. You'll remember Song of the Open Road, passage 4, the gay fresh sentiment here. Gay children. We're back to children again. I think he's playing this game with Song of Myself 6 and a child fetching grass. And youths, we'll think about I Hear America Singing, and of course the young men singing as they come back. And they're all together with offerings. What is he saying here at 2a? Well, I think that always democracy is growing. And it's all about clustering. It's all about there's always something for everyone to offer. It's the beauty of the inclusivity of his vision. Everybody's got a song. Everybody's got a verse to play in the great play, the great drama, as he will, of course, say it in O Me, O Life. I love the repetition of Song of the Open Road, passage 6. And in fact, if all you were doing was just picking up Leaves of Grass and just reading it from start to finish, and you hit this, you would find yourself saying, I know I heard this somewhere, and it would kind of want to take you back to an earlier set of lines. And of course that takes us to 3a. And the idea of the open road is for a Song of the Open Road, I think is central here. Finally, at 3b, how can you own a poem like this? Well, what was a time that you watched great growth happening? And who do you cluster around? And what offerings do you make? I hope that your reading of Leaves of Grass leads you to offerings as well. It certainly should. Thank you.